Hey you guys, so today I'm going to be showing you how to set up your Launchpad to perform one of your own original songs. And the first thing you want to do is figure out exactly how you want to play your piece. Meaning, do you want to play just the drums? Do you want to play every little individual sound? Where do you want to play those sounds? You know what I mean? So once you figure that out, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to bounce your stems through your mastering chain. And the reason that I would recommend doing it through your mastering chain is because, and I'm going to get into this in a little bit. It's just a philosophical thing. For me, the most important thing about now at this point in my life, the most important thing about the Launchpad performance is, can I do it perfectly pretty much every time so that I could play it at a show? And so by bouncing it through your mastering chain, while it's technically not going to behave in exactly the same way, that's not going to make a difference in a live setting where, you're in a giant auditorium and the sound's bouncing off the walls. And the reason I'm saying do it through the mastering chain is because, unless you're incredibly gifted, your mastering chain is probably going to be more than just a super low latency limiter. And so I know mine is not that, although I have friends whose are. So that's what I'm talking about. But basically, my mastering chain, is something like Ozone, and that's going to add a lot of latency. And so it's very, very important that you have the absolute lowest latency possible. Latency is just, I'm sure you guys know this, but for those who don't, just the amount of time it takes from when I'm pushing a button to when the sound is actually being performed. So you want to bounce through that mastering chain the parts that you want to perform. So you can see, like, for example, we're going to go over Go today, even though I've already done it. We're going to reconstruct it a little bit. You can see that I have the second drop with no kick or snare, the first drop with no kick or snare, the kick, the snap, the snare, and the whole track with no snap. And that's, because I wanted to, in the verses, only play the snap, and then in the drop, I wanted to do all the sounds and the kick and the snare. But this isn't even as broken down as I used to have it. I used to have it where I would play every single hi-hat. I would play, if I had a riser that was 16 bars, I would trigger that, and I would trigger a reverse cymbal, and I would have to do it like, 6 beats before I wanted the, the like final maximum point of that reverse cymbal to be. And I've kind of moved away from that, again, because it goes back to that philosophy where, back when I wasn't playing shows and I was just making YouTube videos, I just wanted it to look as technically impressive as possible. Because one, for me, that's a lot of fun, just growing up playing piano, doing Rachmaninoff Liszt, the whole shebang. It's kind of, I always saw really difficult pieces like that as like a challenge, like a personal challenge, Beethoven's in his grave and he's, challenging me. He thinks I can't, play his sonatas, and so for me, that was kind of what it was with the YouTube videos, was I just wanted it to be technically difficult. But the problem with that, and I've said this in some videos and some interviews before, is that, you sit there and then you do it like 50 times to get a perfect take. And in a live setting, that's not going to fly. You need to nail it every single time. So for me, that's really important. And so that's one of the reasons I do it this way now, is because, like, for example, really long samples, like, for example, that example I was giving you guys of like a 16-bar riser in a build section. Let's say your track's 140 BPM, unless you're doing it at exactly 140 BPM, let's say you're going faster, right? So if you're going faster, then that riser is going to go into your drop. You're going to get to the drop before the riser's done, and it's going to sound terrible, unless you set up your choke groups in a very specific way. And we're going to talk about choke groups too. Or on the flip side of that, you go too slowly, and then your riser finishes way before it should have, right? So, set it up how you want to do it, but understand there's some drawbacks. And so, you could do every single sound, even really long, elongated samples. Just, you might want to use a metronome. And so for me, I don't want to use a metronome. When I'm in a band with my friends and I'm playing keys, I'm not using a metronome. I'm listening to the drummer, and unless we have backing tracks that we're playing along to, then only the drummers listen to the metronome. You know what I mean? So I just don't want to do that for a show. I want to, have a little bit of rubato. I want to be able to, do it at my own pace. So that's a big one. Just checking my notes. So once you have it bounce through your master, however you want to do it, then you're going to want to start to import them into Ableton. And so the first thing you want to do is just make sure that you go to your preferences, and you can do that if you're on a Mac by doing Command, comma. Let me full screen this real quick. So you can do that by going Command, comma, and then if you go to the MIDI preferences, you can see that I've set my control surface to the Launchpad Pro, the input of the Launchpad Pro live port, and the output of the Launchpad Pro live port. And then I've also, on the input and the output, turned on the track sync and the remote for all three. I don't know if you have to do that. If you don't, sue me. But, you know, I definitely know you have to do remote if you want to do the macros and obviously the track. So just do them. If you don't, whatever. Not a big deal. So, anywho, once you got that set up, then what we can do is we can, right now we're only going to need like, you know, a MIDI channel. And so what you can do is if you drag a drum rack, actually, let's do an instrument rack first. There's like a million ways to do this kind of stuff. And so I'm just going to show you guys a bunch of the different ways that you can do it, and then you can set it up however you want to do it. So in my instrument rack right here, I can drag in a drum rack. Like so. And so if I set my MIDI from to my Launchpad input, and then I set my channel to channel 6, this is the MIDI channels. The Launchpad Pro and the MK2 are channel 6 by default. I mean, you can change that, but you know, you don't really have to. But now notice if I hit the arm recording now by pushing any of these buttons, now you can see down here that I'm getting, there we go. I'm getting, where'd you go? There we go. I'm getting input right here. And so that's only going to happen if you set the MIDI from, you set the channel to the right thing, and you arm recording. And what I'm going to show you guys in a second is how to do live side chaining. And so we're going to need to go back to this and not have it be exclusive. But anyway, so we got our drum rack and within our instrument rack, and I'll show you why we might want to do that later. And I don't recommend just dropping your samples into here. What I actually want to do is I want to, within this drum rack, I want to put instrument racks within all of these. And you'll see why in a sec. But, you know, it's kind of like this Inception thing. We got a drum rack and an instrument rack, we got instrument racks and a drum rack and an instrument rack. But let's see, where's this guy? That guy's right here. Okay, cool. So, then on this guy, what I can do is I can put a sampler. And so we're going to be, I like to put my samples within a sampler instead of just on here. So we can do this thing called round robining, and I'll show you guys how to do that. But before we get into any of the nitty gritty, we just got to get the basic things set up. So, you know, we've got our sampler within our drum rack, which is in an sampler within our instrument rack, which is in a drum rack and an instrument rack. And then we're going to want to add some MIDI effects, and I'll show you guys why. So let's say I just drag, you know, my kick. Let's say I'm going to put my kick here. I never put my kick here, but let's just pretend that I'm going to put my kick here. And again, you can map it however you want, whatever you feel comfortable with. So you can see that I just have like a loop, just like a, there we go, just like 3 kicks. But I'm just going to pick, you know, whichever one, doesn't really matter. I'm going to change the sustain mode to just this one-shot one right here, and then I can just, you know, take the ins and the outs and put them to where I want to put them. It's really important that you guys zoom in and just make sure that you're at a zero crossing, which is basically like, see how the waveform is kind of going up and down. And so if you were to, let's say you were to put your in, like instead, like I would probably put it here, but let's say you were to put it like here, then you would get a click at the beginning of the sample, just because you're basically asking your speakers to go from here, which is them not moving in the middle, that's called the zero crossing, to like all the way here at +1, and you're asking them to do that at the speed of light, and they can't move at the speed of light. They can only move at the speed of sound. So that's not going to happen. So you want to do it at a zero crossing, and there's like a snap thing right here. So you can hit snap, and then it'll automatically snap to a perfect zero crossing for you. But sometimes, like, you know, there's not a perfect zero crossing exactly where you want. So you can get like a, you know, pretty damn close one. So like, you know, I might do like that looks like one right there. So I might do like that guy. And you can just test it, you know, do you hear a click? No, okay, good. And so, you know, I just set the out to there. You can set it to here. It doesn't really matter. I don't really have a tail there. But notice how when I play this and I let go, it doesn't play the whole kick, right? I have to hold it down to play the whole kick. If I just let go, then it stops. And so that's a problem. I mean, it's not necessarily a problem if that's what you want, but usually for me, the way I like to do things, that's a problem. And so if we go over here to MIDI effects and we add the note length effect, I can just drag this right before my sampler. Then I can just set the length to something obscene like 60 seconds, and now it'll play that. You know, all I have to do is hit it once, and it'll just play the whole sample, and that sample can be up to 60 seconds. And there's things you can do if the sample's longer than 60 seconds, but again, usually it's not going to be longer than 60 seconds. So anyway, I'm gonna just leave that for now. We're gonna replace that sample later. Actually, you guys don't even have that sample, but basically, we just wanted to get our note length in here. And then I'm also gonna add a random in here, and we'll go over why in a sec. Right now, okay, actually, well, let's go over why now. So there's this thing called round robining, and so basically, what you can do is if you want to play a button, like let's say my kick, right? I want to play the kick, and then the next time I hit it, I want it to be like a different kick or a snare or whatever. You know. This could be like super useful if you are running out of space or you don't want to have to use a bank switch on the right to kind of toggle because it's going to toggle the same way every time. So with a round robin, if I want to do this kick, but I want it to switch, then what I can do is if you just open up in sampler, you open up the zones right here, you can move the coverage of that. See where there's like that little R there? You can just move this coverage to only the little R for the start and the finish. And then what I can do is I can bring another sample into here. That's just to make it obvious, let's just bring in a snare. So we're just bringing a snare into here. And so now I have a kick and I have a snare. And then I'm just going to do, actually, you know what's better? Before you import that, let me just delete this. It just makes it easier. If you just duplicate this kick and then move that over, that way you don't have to do the start and the finish again, and then you won't have to change the root. It'll have the root automatically move to C# for you. And then I can just move that snare over here and replace that guy, the kick. And then now all I got to do is just set the ins and the outs again. And again, you can use the snap. Sometimes the snap doesn't go exactly where you want, so I'm just going to go, you know, right here before this transient. Looks pretty good. And then I'm going to go all the way to the end of the tail. And so now it's still only going to play the kick. Because notice how it's only taking the input on C. But if I want to, what I can do is I can take this random effect, change the chance to 100%. And that's going to make it happen all the time, obviously. And then you can change the mode from random to alternate. And then it's basically going to just go up chromatically depending on how many choices you have. So if I have 12 choices, it's going to go C, C sharp, D, D. It's going to, you know, just go up 12 half steps. But if I have 2, which is how many I have, then it'll go C, C sharp, C, C sharp, C, C sharp. So it'll go kick, and then it'll go snare, and then it'll go kick, and then it'll go snare, just like that. And it'll just automatically do that. I don't have to do anything. So that's a round robin. That's super useful for a number of scenarios. And then let's go back to any other things that we might have to do. So when it comes to this basic setup, we're pretty good. And so what I'd like to do at this point is, normally I wouldn't have the samples in here yet. What I would do is then you can just option drag this instrument rack once you have your note length and your random there. And let's just make the random 1 for now. I'm just going to get rid of the snare. And then we can option drag that, and then we can just populate the entire Launchpad with instrument racks that have random and note length and a sampler. And then you can just replace the kick with whatever you need. Like I said, you know, you probably won't even have the kick on there yet. So I'm just going to do these 16, and then let's just leave it at that for now, because I need to talk to you guys about live sidechaining before we get into bank switches and stuff like that. So another thing that you, or at least that I've experienced, that you need to do in order to make the performance the best for a live setting is, because like if you bounce, like I was talking about earlier, you bounce it through the master. But the thing about bouncing it through the side chain is if you're not robotically perfect, then the side chain's not going to be as clean as it would in the track. So what I like to do is I actually like to do additional side chaining within the Ableton project file. So what we can do, let's say I have all these, already mapped to everywhere I need it for the Launchpad. Then what I can do is I can just, let me just get rid of this for a sec. I can just duplicate this 3 times. And then what I do is I call this one, rename, I call this guy things to sidechain. And so that's just going to be, everything that you would have put a sidechain compressor on, or you would have set to a sidechain bus in your DAW. And then I'm going to have my sidechain trigger. And that's going to be the kick that we're going to use as a ghost kick. And then this guy would be things to not sidechain. And so the reason that I have 3, you're like, well, then why not just take the kick, things to not sidechain? Some of you guys are probably like, well, why not just take the, I don't know if I'm really far away from the computer, so I might be typing things wrong. Some of you guys are like, why not just take the kick, and then from here, if you're going to put the kick and things to not sidechain, and just have it do that. Well, the thing is, like, this is not just going to be the kick and the snare. It's going to, if I don't want to sidechain certain other percussion, I don't want that to be triggering this. There's a bunch of different things that you might not want, like vocals. I don't want the vocals necessarily to get sidechained, but so I would put them here, but I also don't want them to trigger, I don't want the vocals to trigger this. So this is, the sidechain trigger is basically just going to be your kick, or if you're being super smart about it, like literally just a hi-hat transient, or just the smallest thing possible that that we're even going to turn off, so it's not even going to the audio, to the master. That is placed. So let's say my kick is here, right? So I would place, I have my actual kick here. Hold on. So what you got to do is you got to right-click this, and then it's, for you guys, it's probably going to set to ARM exclusive, so you got to turn that off, and then it'll let you ARM 3 things. If the ARM exclusive thing is checked, then it'll only let you ARM 1 at a time. And so, let me get rid of, because now the kick's coming from both these places. Let me get rid of the kick from right here. So, I have my kick here, but then I also have my kick here. And so, I would have basically only, let's say this is my kick, and that's my, let's pretend, right now that's a kick, but let's pretend that's going to be the snare. Then I would only have on the side chain my kick and my snare. And so only those would get triggered, like so. And then let me replace this with a snare real quick so it sounds like it should. I'm just gonna set the max, the in. I'm just gonna do it sloppy right now. And then the out. Okay, cool. So we got a kick, and then let me delete this guy. We got a kick here, and you can hear it coming out. We got a snare here. But notice how, I still have the audio coming from here, and so any other sounds here wouldn't be triggered, because the only thing that this has is these two, which are where my kick and my snare are. And so we're going to be able to put a compressor on here and then have it get sidechained from that guy, basically. So I hope that makes sense. And so the way you could just do that is just, add a compressor. Audio effects, and then we can put a compressor at the very end of our chain. And, and you can just set the input from the sidechain trigger, and then just set it how you normally would. However you're doing your sidechain settings. I'm gonna actually make a video about how to do it properly using math, but right now we don't need to get into that. All right, so let's talk about choke groups. So when you guys are importing your sounds, you're definitely gonna want to be using choke groups. And all choke groups are, for now, let me just pretend that this is only the kick and the snare. All right, so when you guys are doing choke groups, basically what choke groups are is if you have a sound that you want to stop. Where's my, oh, it's down here. Okay, cool. So yeah, so I would just have to option drag this guy to here, and then I want to put him right there. There we go. And then just make sure option's still being held down. Cool. All right, so I got him right here. So let's say I have, you know, my first drop sound, and then let me zoom in on that. Cool. So I can just zoom in, and you can also do this in the arrangement view as well. This chopping up stuff. I just sometimes like to do it here. I'm just gonna make sure my sustain mode is one shot, and then let me just play that again. And here's the little click, because I'm out of the zero crossing. Let me find that zero crossing. There you go. So for now, that's fine. You know, if you're actually doing it, you know, actually find where it needs to be. It's a lot easier if you do it in here, but, you know, just for time purposes. So let me set the out. So let's just pretend that I just want that to go for like a long time. Let's pretend that that's what I wanted. And let's pretend that, and I can just option drag that I have another sound that I need to trigger. And what you're going to want to do, see how if this guy's not done, and then I play that guy, it's an absolute mess, or vice versa. What you're going to want to do, is set a choke group, and the way you can set up your choke groups is if you in your drum rack you hit the chain list, and then you go to I/O. And I learned this from Il Gates, so I want to say thank you to Il Gates. Shout out to you, Dylan. And you find where in the I/O the guy that you want to choke is, and so he's right there. And then I'm just gonna set him to. You can set to whatever you want. So let's say I set this guy to 10, and that guy to 10. Then they'll stop each other. So I don't know why my camera keeps stopping, but they'll stop each other. Which is exactly what you're going to want in most scenarios. So you have 16 different choke groups. Anything that's on the same choke group is going to stop anything else that's on the same choke group. So, you know, you might want, let's say you have synths to be on choke group 10, and then maybe you're doing like percussion, they want to be on choke group 1. You know, it just depends on, it doesn't matter how you set it up, but you know, it just depends on what you want to do. So that's a thing that you want to be very aware of is choke groups, because they can, you know, make things very dope. Another thing also, when you're setting up the ins and the outs, one thing that I really like to do is, let's say this was a shit show. I just did it real quick. Let's say that you know, this is actually where the sample ended and I wanted it to end there. I might actually just give myself a little bit more leeway. And again, like, do it at a zero crossing. Obviously, it's not where I want to do it, but I might want to give myself a little bit more leeway in case I'm a little early or a little late. And so that way, even though this guy is, let's pretend, is starting exactly where I want it to, if I'm a little, you know, I'm a little slow on the BPM or I'm a little late, you know, it's a little bit more forgiving than if the sample just ended. If you give yourself like a little bit more leeway on the tail side of things where the sample's ending. All right, so that's choke groups. And so now let's talk about just how you might, we already talked about round robining. Let's just talk about other bank switching things that you, bank and macro switching that you guys might want to do. So you can do this a number of different ways, and that's why I kind of set it up with the instrument rack first. If you want, you can do it within the second instrument rack, and you can just go here and do this, or you can do it on the big one. It just depends on how you want to do it. But let's pretend that we're going to do it on this inner one, and we want to do it, let's just say, for one individual sound. So let's say I want this guy to be a different sound when I hit this top button. So let me just, boom, okay. So what I can do is if I go here into my instrument rack that's on the drum rack, and then I have, again, the chain list opened up, I can go to chain, and then I can basically just duplicate this. And let's say, you know, on this guy that I'm going to set him to, I don't know, random place over here, and that's where I want it. Obviously, that's not what you would want to do. But anyway, so what I can do is I can move this chain selector right here to, you know, let's say I set it to 1, 1, right? Or let's say I go all the way 127. It just depends on how you're setting things up. If you're going to use like all 8 of these, then you know you could do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you're just going to do 1, for example, then you can very easily just toggle 0, 1, 27. It just depends on what you want to do. But what I can do is I can open up these macros, and I can map this top portion to, let's say, macro 1. And then I can unmap that. And so now this chain selector, you know, as you can see, this macro is gonna go through the different chain selectors. And so then what I can do is I can hit MIDI, click on this macro, and then just tap one of my, and you can use any button, it doesn't have to be one on the right, but, you know, these are the most convenient. And then I'll just do, let's say, this guy. And so then by doing that, now you can see that he's been mapped, and you can set different mins and maxes depending on where you want it to go. But, you know, if you just want it to have 2 different options and toggle between 0 and 127, then you can just leave it there. And then I'm just turn this off. And now you'll notice if I hit this guy, now there's a light that comes on because he's actually mapped to something. And you can see that the chain selector is going between 0 and 127 and 0 and 127. And so if it's on 0 and I hit this button, it's going to play that sample. And then if I hit that guy, right? So now whatever that was, then it'll do that. So that's, you know, one way to do it. Like I said, you could do that in this big one if you wanted to have it in completely different, you know, all of the buttons to be completely different in a much easier way than doing it that way. But if you only have specific buttons that need to change, you know, you can do that way. There's not really a right way to do it. And then another thing that I sometimes like to do is, let's say you wanted it to, you know, you could have a third one, and then you could basically just automate these speaker ons. So like, let's say, you know, I duplicate this, and then this is a different sample, I don't know, over here, cool. And then I'm going to map this guy. So I'm just going to click him, and I'm going to hit the second button, for example, and then this guy hit that second button, this guy hit that second button. And then what I can do is if I just turn this guy off, then as you can see, whenever I hit this, that guy's on, and then, oh wait, no, sorry, I don't want to do that. I want to do these two on, and then that guy off. So these two are on, and then I hit this, and then only that guy's on. So let's say I'm on, you know, these two off, and then I push this, it's going to play this top sample. And then I push this guy, now it's going to go over here, but it's going to play this middle one because this guy's off. And then I push this guy, and now only that guy's on, and it's still on 127. You know, so it just, like I said, there's no right way to do it. It just depends on how you want to do things and how you need to do things to suit your needs. Anyway, hope that was helpful. And, yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.